Now we're going to move on to our final special presentation with Mr. Toomey.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Bomengo and the Board of Education. My name is Justin Toomey. I have the privilege of serving as the Superintendent of Schools. And for this presentation, I've also going to be tag teaming with our fabulous Director of Special Education, who also serves as our McKinney Vento Homeless Liaison. Every district is required to have a homeless liaison to support and work with families who are experiencing various types of homelessness situations. And so education is very important to us as an administrative team and a board. And so we felt we wanted to be able to just provide some insight. I know I've attended a multitude of trainings with as high as the state about the legislation, what the impact is for schools, how we're supporting families as we go through this, right? And obviously we're all in this for the kids and for helping kids as much as we can. It is not a secret, or maybe it is a secret, but New Jersey, especially Morris County, has had a significant increase in homelessness in the recent last couple of years, and that's something that I know has been my first year as superintendent. My first county meeting on the agenda was the homeless increase, and here we are in year two, and it's only continuing. And obviously, I'm not here to talk about the factors or why that's happening. That's the situation that we're in right now. So just to provide some education on what school districts are required to do as per the law, and then also some of the things that the district is doing, and what we're experiencing. So we're first going to start with the overview. So the definition of homelessness, and just so you wonder why you're seeing the state of New Jersey seal there. That's because these are directly from a presentation. This part is from a presentation that is actually given by one of the state homeless liaisons. So these are, their words essentially, and I wanted to try to make sure that the message was as clear as possible. So definition of homeless is students who lack a regular, fixed, and adequate nighttime residence, including students that are sheltered, which means living in emergency and transitional shelters, unsheltered, which are living in places not designated as regular sleeping accommodations, living in cars, campgrounds, public spaces, and abandoned buildings. And then we have hotel and motel, which is self-explanatory, living in a hotel or a motel, and what we call doubled up. And so the term doubled up means that they're sharing housing due to loss of housing or economic hardship. So those are the four areas within the definition of the categories, I should say, of homeless. So there's steps to the process that we're required to follow as a district. One thing that the district did, thanks to Mrs. Copen last year, is we added a McKinney Vento identification form to our registration process. So as a family is registering their children for school, we are able to have a form that is in there, and it's provided to every family. It's not just handed out, to certain families that are able to fill it out. And that basically is a screener, right, to let us know that maybe there is some kind of challenging situation. And at that point, Mrs. Copen is then actually calling herself and having a conversation with that family to clarify, are you homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act, or what's going on, right? And again, how can we support your children? So federally, right, so you're going to see the next few slides as a federal, code, and then the New Jersey Administrative Code. And so federally, each liaison shall ensure that homeless children and youths are identified by school personnel and through coordination activities with other entities and agencies. So in our district, our liaison is Mrs. Copen. So that is part of that process that I was just sharing. On the state level, a district board of education shall determine a child is homeless when they reside in any of the following, and then it goes through the different things that I just explained: public or private place not designated for regular sleeping accommodation, vehicle, tent, park, abandoned building, bus, train station, the residence of relatives or friends where the child resides out of necessity because their family lacks a permanent residence of its own, substandard housing, right? Or substandard housing, I should say. So the whole idea is the key word is temporary, right? Temporarily displaced, people that don't have a fixed nightly residence to stay in. As far as the enrollment goes, so federally, the school shall immediately enroll the homeless child or youth, even if the child or youth is unable to produce records normally required for enrollment. So the conversation is, we basically, get the information from them. Mrs. Copen speaks with them. They have to fill out our online registration form, right, just to be able to register like any parent would. And then as far as some of the documentation, for instance, if you own a home in the town, we want a deed from the owner. If you rent a home in the town, we want to see a landlord affidavit and a deed. If you are coming in homeless, we need you to just fill out that McKinney Vento screening form, and then we work through the other requirements. Obviously, we're still required to get immunizations and all of the things that we would normally be required to, but as the code says, we are supposed to immediately enroll them. It doesn't mean that if they call or email us tonight, they're in tomorrow, right? Because obviously we still need to make sure that they're getting in. So it usually does take a few days, but we're not putting any barriers in their way of enrolling in our schools. As well, if a dispute arises over enrollment, the child shall be immediately admitted to the school in which enrollment is sought, or pending, right? So if there is a dispute, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, while the dispute or the appeal process is playing out, we still have to, and we have to educate them here. And I think the impetus behind that is because, you're trying to provide the education for the child, and trying to keep it as continuous as possible. From the state level, upon notification of the need of enrollment of a homeless child, the liaison, again, Mrs. Copen, in the school district of residence shall coordinate enrollment procedures immediately based upon the best interest of the child. And then if a dispute arises regarding enrollment of a homeless child, the homeless child shall be immediately enrolled. So you could see there's obviously the federal and the state, there's a lot of overlap here, but we felt it was important to include both, just so everyone kind of understands, what any district in New Jersey, public school district is required to follow this. And then when you move into the tuition part, right? So federally, if the homeless child or youth's living arrangement in the area served by the district of origin terminate and the child, though continuing their education in school of origin, begins living in any area served by another district, and LEA is just a fancy term for, I think, Learning Education Agency, if I'm not mistaken, right? So it's just the school district. The district of origin and the district in which the homeless child or youth is living shall agree upon a method to apportion the responsibility and cost for providing the child with transportation to and from the school of origin. If the districts are unable to agree upon such method, the responsibility and cost for transportation shall be shared equally. And it'll make a little more sense when you see the state's part of it. So the school district of residence for a homeless child or youth shall be responsible for the education of the child and shall pay for the cost of tuition when the child attends school in another district, and provide transportation for the child. So I will explain what that actually looks like, and as I've sat through, it's taken me only about 10 of these trainings to start to understand what we're actually doing and trying to go through all of the legalese, and that's why we're grateful to have Mr. Jacoby here, who gets to eat and digest this for a living. God bless you. But it will make a little more sense as you kind of see the action of what that looks like, because obviously, finances are a big part of the challenges of trying to support people who are struggling, right? And so obviously, we obviously want to support the kids, and so this is something that we're actually working through right now with the state, as far as what does that funding look like, right? And so as far as our transportation, right, because tuition and transportation often go together. Each district shall coordinate with other districts on inter-district issues such as transportation. Each liaison shall ensure that the parent, guardian of homeless children and youth and any unaccompanied youth is fully informed of all transportation services, including transportation to the school of origin, and is assisted in accessing transportation. And on the state side, ensure the parent or guardian of a homeless child or youth or any unaccompanied youth is fully informed of all transportation services, etc. So obviously we have to provide that transportation. And when we move on to the next slide, we have the district's responsibility. So this is where it really kind of boils down to the nuts and bolts of this. So the way a district of origin is determined is when a student has been domiciled meaning sleeping in that place for more than 365 days, right? So after 365 days, if a student is in a temporary residence, right, for more than 365 days, Hanover Township, in this case, right, or any district where they are, becomes the district of origin. So for instance, let's just say we have a family who came from Chester, right? And they've been living at one of the hotels or motels in town. Up until 365 days, Chester is responsible for them financially. Once 365 days pass, that is when Hanover Township would have to take over, paying for that. The other piece is that the parent has a choice of which school district the child attends. So if the parent says, I want my child to continue to go to Chester, then Hanover Township is paying Chester tuition, and we are paying for the transportation to get the child from point A in Hanover Township to Chester. Now, technically, there is no limit on how far that could happen. We could have a child that moves to Atlantic City, and if the parent says that the child, they want to go to Atlantic City, we are responsible to pay Atlantic City tuition, and we are also responsible to transport the child from here to Atlantic City. Now, there are mechanisms that I as a superintendent, in consultation with the liaison, could say, listen, we do not feel like it's in the best interest for your child to be on a bus for 2 hours each way, back and forth. We are basically making the determination that your child has to come to Hanover Township. They then appeal that, but while they're appealing it, if they want to go to Atlantic City, we are busing and paying Atlantic City to educate them. Then the regional liaison weighs in, and then the county superintendent essentially is where the ultimate decision rests, right? So if the county superintendent says, nope, they're going to Atlantic City, then that child is getting picked up on a 2-hour bus ride going to Atlantic City and coming back. And if they say, nope, the child has to go to Hanover Township, then the child obviously comes to Hanover Township, right? And so I'm like a scenario person, so that's why, some of the language is one thing, but just to understand what happens. So the other challenge, is that technically what happens when a child or a family moves, Mrs. Copen is calling districts. So let's just say we have a family that's at one of our motel or hotels in town, right? They move to Parsippany. Mrs. Copen is calling Parsippany's liaison and saying, hi, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, this is Sherry Copen from Hanover Township, just informing you that this family has moved to Parsippany. Then that family gets relocated to another town in Hoboken. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. This is Sherry Copen from Hanover Township. That we have a child who is district of origin was Hanover Township. They went to Parsippany. Now they're in Hoboken. And then they move as far as many places as they move where they're temporarily displaced. We are responsible as the district of origin. So with that, until a family either becomes permanently homed, which of course wouldn't that be wonderful, right, for people to get permanent housing, right, and not have to be in the situation, or, right, like, so that's one option of how they would not be eligible for McKinney Vento anymore, or they live in another town. So let's just say they go to, a hotel in Hoboken. If they're in Hoboken for more than 365 days, Hoboken becomes the district of origin. But hypothetically, if you have a family who is temporarily displaced now, next year, following year, we would be responsible for their children's education and through eighth grade as a district because we're the district of origin. So that stays that responsibility stays with the district of origin. The reason it wouldn't be through high school is because we're a K-8 district, right? So like I said, the only ways that they're not considered McKinney Vento is if they find permanent housing, which woohoo, we would love that, or they establish they're domiciled somewhere else for 365 days. Now I can tell you with the number of students that we're working through and supporting, and we'll have that slide Mrs. Copen will go through in a few moments, there are many students that have moved multiple times that Mrs. Copen has a very thorough spreadsheet on, and then it's all about the dates because what's happening now is districts, you're supposed to notify. Mrs. Copen is notifying these other districts are not. So I'll give you an example. We just found out late last week that we have 2 students living in one of our hotels and motels that, oh, by the way, they've been there for 365 days just about. We just didn't tell you. So guess what? So now, as of 2 weeks from now, we are financially responsible and we're the district of origin, and the county superintendent has been stressing it is not right to surprise other districts like that, because from a budgeting standpoint, we're, just so everyone knows, whether you're watching it at home or now, we're talking about 26-27 budget right now, right, in our central office. That's where we are right now. So this year's budget, which is cooked, right, it's already allocated and encumbered. So when you start to surprise districts with these types of unknowns, we're talking, and you'll see the cost in a little bit, it's staggering. We're not just talking like, $100. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Because you could think about what the cost is to be transporting kids, sometimes up to an hour away from where they're coming from to here. And I'm being very mindful that this is obviously, there's compassion because you feel bad that human beings are in the situation, but at the same time, we're balancing that with the responsibility that we have, obviously, to be transparent to the public, to let people know how tax dollars are being spent, but also to just understand a little bit more about the process and what our responsibility is, right? So some of the scenarios that we're going to highlight, we have in-district students who are general education, right? They don't require any extra services. And then we also have special education / related services, which would be through an IEP situation, right? So we have students in that category that are attending our district that are eligible or classified as McKinney Vento. We also have out-of-district students that are also general education, and I'll explain that because that's sounds a little bit weird, but I'll explain what I mean by that. We also have, again, special education / related services, and then transportation to and from the school of choice. And so I'm going to show you the methods of reimbursement, and then Mrs. Copen's going to talk you through some of the scenarios. So when a family is in state, so if they move from, let's just say, Chester, I'll use Chester again, I don't know why I'm choosing Chester, they have good apple picking. I'll go from Chester to Hanover, right? If it's under 365 days, Chester is responsible to either pay us if they want to come here, or they go to Chester and Chester buses them. So right now, we have other towns sending buses to the hotels and motels in our town to transport them to the district that they're in right now, currently as we speak, right? So some of the motels and hotels in our town have about 5 towns worth of buses that are pulling through that parking lot every morning because they have the right to go to that school, right? If they choose to. We have to, so like I said, up to 365, we are not paying for that as a district. After 365, same family, right, still wants to go to Chester. Now, we're using, our transportation resources and having our coordinator reach out to coordinate that transportation and getting a contract ourselves because we don't have the transportation fleet to be able to drive people, all over different towns, right? So we obviously have to outsource that. And again, you'll see some of the costs of what that looks like. But we are at that point, Chester is sending us a contract for the education of that child that we are paying, which basically is almost like we're calling it an out-of-district placement, right? Because that they have the right, according to the statute, to be able to go to Chester, and so they could keep wanting to go to Chester, and we would keep paying them. We would have to keep paying Chester, from our budget. So the New Jersey state does not reimburse anything for students that are coming from one municipality to another municipality. That is all local, right? And I'll keep my own opinions to myself about the funding piece of it, but it's really hard for all districts in New Jersey to be, incurring these additional fiscal challenges, right? And what we call an unfunded mandate, right? Because the mandate is not, we want to help kids, of course, but we're not getting the support that we need financially, from the state to be able to do this. So the only reimbursement we get for students is if they move in from out of state, right? So if they move in from Florida to New Jersey and we happen to be the first place that they enroll in, we are able to get reimbursement up to the 365 days, but we are the district of origin. So, I'll give you an example. If a family comes from out of state, we essentially, even if they weren't here for up to 365 days, we're still the district of origin for them because this was their first landing place in New Jersey. So now Mrs. Copen there is a scenario like that, so it's not like I'm making this up out of nothing. Mrs. Copen is following, this family around as well, not physically, but obviously, keeping up with them, working with them. That family, again, gets to choose, since we're the district of origin, whether they want to come here or if they want to go to the district that they're domiciled in, right? So that's the family's choice. And if they choose to come here, we are paying to bus them from wherever they're living now to come to Hanover. And if they choose to go to the district where they're currently living, then we would pay the district. Now, again, like I said, that's the only time where the state would be involved, as far as a financial, reimbursement. So I'm going to have Mrs. Copen share the numbers with you just so you can get a sense of our scenarios.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toomey.
Yeah.
Appreciate your support during this, as well as Mr. Santiago, who's been very helpful in transportation, because we are chasing and relocating and looking at changing a lot of bus routes throughout the year in order to engage and be able to continue to offer the consistency in education. And that's our number one goal. When families are moving from district to district, from location to location, we're trying to offer them a consistent place. We can only imagine how stressful it must be for them to not have a place to call home at night. So it's not a unempathetic situation, if I may add. So currently, just so you are aware, and I'll share with the board, we have 19 students that I've been made aware of could be transferring into the district this year under that 365-day rule. Those are the ones that I've been notified of properly to date for this coming school year. So in addition to what you're going to be seeing today, which are our real numbers, there's potentially 19, plus the districts who have not given us that protocol of notifying us within 48 hours, which is a customary just tradition that they're trying to start at the state level, but there's no restriction as to if that can happen or not. On the other side of that, I will share, I've been way on top of notifying school districts when people are displaced for that conscientious reason that they do have to face their BAs and they do have to find transportation in order to continue those relationships. So we are trying to partner with those districts to do so. So what you'll see here are in-district students. We currently have 10 students enrolled in our general education that are in-house. The parents have elected for them to come in-house to us. We currently have 4 under the special education resource class. Those are in-class support classes that we already have running where there's co-teaching happening and it does meet their IEP needs. We also have 2 that are in self-contained classrooms. As well as you'll also see the ESL numbers there. Currently, we're in-house. We are transporting 14 students to and from displaced. Now, it is not illegal to be displaced. It is not illegal to live in a tent. It is not illegal to live doubled up. So I just want to remind you that these are temporary situations. And these ones that are identified have been ruled out as being true McKinney Vento. These are not hypothetical numbers in any way.
Just to highlight the
Sure.
total for the in-district, so in case you can't see it, so $557,357.92. And some of you might be asking, well, where's that number coming from, right? So obviously, as part of our budget process that we file with the state every year and the board approves, that is our real cost per pupil, right? And what cost per pupil is comprised of is what are all of the costs of the district, and then you obviously divide it by the students that are in the district, right? And Mrs. Krasny can correct me if I'm not correct, and then that's where we get that cost. And all the districts around here hover around that $24,000 mark, so that's pretty consistent. And then you'll notice some of the other costs are higher because of the services that come with that, right? So a small group instruction, if you're in a classroom with 3-4 kids because it's a resource room, obviously you can do the math and figure 22 kids in a class, 3 kids in a class, or 4 kids in a class, and then some students need speech or OT or PT or different related services, right? So that's where we're getting that cost from. And ESL, again, is for our multilingual learners, and then the transportation rate, and that's basically essentially every child in this district to bus costs the district $639 and change, right? So that's a standard amount. So and that's, again, these are all documents that you could search up and look. So these numbers did actually come from somewhere, and like Mrs. Copen said, these are the real costs of our students that have been identified but are attending Hanover Township Public Schools. So now I'm going to turn it back over for what we're calling out-of-district students.
So with that, can we go back one slide?
Sorry.
With that slide, I just want to note, we automatically assume that children are displaced have been identified. They have not. They do not all come with IEPs or 504s or needing ESL or ELL programming. So a big component of that is when they do come to us, we are finding there's educational gaps. And we have to identify and go through an evaluation process, which can be very timely. Unfortunately, some of the students are then displaced again to other places, in other schools, in other towns, in other states. So we're kind of chasing after them, making sure that we're doing our best to close those gaps. So in some ways, we are just kind of going in a circle. But I want to point out that most of the students currently are general education students. Moving into what we have entitled out-of-district students. These are not out-of-district based on need academically. These are students in which the parent has chosen to attend the previous or the other school district. So currently, if you look at these numbers, they're quite high. We have general education students. We have 5 students in which parents have elected to have their children transported to other districts. What that means for Hanover is we are getting a bill for their tuition at that other public school. We have reached out and offered our services. We have programs in-house in which they can attend. The parent has, by choice, decided to go to those other districts. So that's a cost that's been incurred by Hanover that's unestimated. Also on there, you will see, and that total is roughly $24,000 per child. It changes depending upon the district in which they're attending. Additionally, you will see right now, it lists out self-contained special education. We do have 3 children in out-of-district placements. Those are non-public districts. Those are schools in which, again, we could absorb those children into our programming that we currently offer, but the parent has opted for that out-of-district placement. So the grand total is a little earth-shattering. When you look at that bottom right number, you will see it exceeds over $700,000. And that is for parent choice. Includes transportation, out-of-district tuition, special needs students.
And the clarification too, so if a child has certain needs, like they're out of district, right? I mean, you know, whether they're ours or we have to send them to a school that meets their needs, right? So, you know, so the parent choice piece for the gen ed students, we have all those programs, you know, absolutely we do. For some of the special education self-contained needs, and to Mrs. Copen's credit, you know, she's trying to work with the families, and maybe there is a, you know, a more appropriate placement. You know, I can tell you that there's a student right now that's on a bus for over an hour every single day with some pretty severe special needs. And, you know, the question is that best for the kid, right? And so, and the challenge becomes, you know, Mrs. Copen is working really, really hard to foster those relationships with those parents, but it gets to a point where there's a lot of unanswered emails, unanswered phone calls, and I'm not judging why or why not she's not getting that partnership, but it really does make it challenging, you know, because you're trying to follow, you know, a lot of different scenarios. And I want to remind everyone, her primary job is the director of special education to support all of the students in the district that have IEPs and 504s, right? And so she's doing a fabulous job. It's like she has a twin because, you know, she just doesn't sleep, you know, but it really is, it is really taxing. And you know, and like I said, not that we don't want to do anything for kids, right? That's why we're in this, but there is a real human factor to this, right? Or the manpower, like Mr. Anderson spoke about earlier, right? Where there are limitations. And I think that what I'm finding in my experience is there are very big districts that are getting a significant amount of funding, you know, and I'm not saying it's everywhere, but there are districts that are getting a lot of funding, or they have a designated McKinney Vento liaison, right? We are a small district, right? We have to be scrappy and resourceful, and, you know, and we're proud of that, right? But because we want to be fiscally responsible, you know, but what happens at a certain point when you start to add, you know, we have about a $34 million budget. When you figure about $1.35 million, right, of pretty much close to real cost, with the potential for another 19 students to come, right, at any point, right, you know, it really does make it challenging, right, to continue to plan for that, right? I mean, just from your home situation, right? If, you know, you can't plan for a tree to fall on your house, God forbid, but, you know, at least hopefully the insurance will pay for the tree, you know, and then you call Mr. Mayor to come help with the stump grinding, right? You know, but you know, it's definitely, you know, it's a challenge, and like we said, we felt it was really important just to help people understand a little bit more about this, and I've learned a whole heck of a lot, you know, in the last year and few months that I've been here, and I know Mrs. Copen has as well, you know, but, you know, obviously the district's also working creatively. We're trying to pursue alternate revenue streams, right? Revenue being the money that comes in. So we did move into the lunch program and enrolled in the National School Lunch Program. That will provide us reimbursements from the government, right, for these meals based on, you know, participation. So even students who are not free and reduced lunch eligible, the more people that buy lunch, the more revenue the district generates, right? And so that's a really great way that the district, you know, can benefit from that and help offset some. The other piece of that is it also, with us being in enrolled could allow us to get more grant opportunities, right? Because we have identified we're in the formal program, whereas we hadn't previously been. Facilities usage, with the board support, we've worked really hard to redo our fee schedule, right, for our facilities usage, our field usage. We had Madison this past summer rent out our school, B Meadow, for $50,000, right? So we're being very creative, and we're trying to find any way we can to bring in revenue for the district. And again, as I said, grants, and we are aggressive, and I have to give Mrs. Krasny, our BA, a huge shout out, because she's like the grant queen. I don't know. She's like, did you hear about this grant? I'm like, no. We're going to look into that, right? So, but that's part of what it is, right? We realize that we can't be on a runaway train of tax increases, and but at the same time, we're getting to a point where the budget is getting stretched to a point where it is going to pop, right? And I say this, and I think at some point we might have a standing room only audience, and it's not because, we're trying to just share what we're doing, but we're also, it's kind of like the scene in Indiana Jones where like the boulder's coming, and we're just trying to run and as quickly as we can to before it runs us over, right? And I say that in jest, obviously. We are having a lot of thoughtful conversations and behind the scenes, and with the board and with the administration, and also with the township, with Mr. Mayor. We appreciate you being here tonight as well. I know you've been involved, very much in our conversations, and very much where we are and how much of a challenge this is for our school district, and a former board member too. So I know, you come from, you started in, in their seat right here. So we realize you understand the real challenge that this is posing for our district. And then this is what no one wants to hear about, is potential cost saving measures, right? But these are things that, depending, and I'm just being worst case scenario, 19 more kids show up at some point this school year. Mrs. Krasny, our BA, is going to come to me and say, Houston, we have a problem. We're not going to be able to pay our bills, right? And I'm not just saying it for sensationalism, right? Because we're really trying to be as creative as we can. But we could be at a point where anything outside the school day, like clubs, sports, all becomes pay to play, right? We could be at a point where right now we offer 1.5 mile busing, which the state says 2. We could have to expand that to 2 miles and see how many kids then don't get bused, right? The state, we're in accordance with the state, but I know, we'll also have standing room only for that board meeting as well, because people, a half a mile, I was in another town where they changed it by like 0.2 of a mile, and people were enraged, right? So the state says we have to do 2 miles. Right now we have kindergarten busing at 0.5 miles. We don't have to offer that, right? We could just say every student is offered busing at 2 miles, or what's called hazardous routes, where they're coming, like we don't want them crossing Route 10 or things like that, right? And then the other one is a really sensitive one, and it's a RIF, which stands for reduction in force. I'm sure you've seen the news over the last several months in other districts where you've had other districts that have been letting go 40, 50, 60 people. We're not trying to say that we're doing that, and as of today, that's not happening. And of course, some of these districts are a lot bigger, but our priority is always going to be the instructional positions. So there is a point where we're going to have to look at non-instructional positions. What does that mean? Secretaries, lunch and recess aides, right? Some of the pieces, and I would argue, are so important to our schools. But at the same time, right, again, we aren't the federal government. We can't keep printing money, and unless someone's writing us a big check, or our taxes are significantly increasing, right, we have to make sure that we're able to meet those. So, so these are things, and I say this, it says potential. Potential could be, I could be letting everyone know in February that some of this is happening. I could be letting some people know in April. We could maybe get through the school year, right? But we're literally walking on a very fine tightrope right now, and I really recognize, especially in the position that we're in, we're not trying to alarm people just to get people up in arms. We're trying to educate and inform people with where our situation is, and how we're working to try to do as much as we can to preserve the excellence that people move to this town for. And so on the last slide, I say we realize this is a challenging time for many public school districts. The Hanover Township Public Schools are committed to doing everything possible to maintain the level of programs and services the community deserves, while also adhering to the NJDOE statutory requirements and the fiscal and budgetary implications needed to operate. And we're committed to staying transparent with you, and letting you know, what's happening. And I have to say, this board has been, the most transparent board I've ever seen as far as what they want to share with the community. And sometimes hard news is hard to digest, right? But it's coming from a place where they're here as elected officials themselves to fight for the families, the children, and the taxpayers of Hanover Township, right, as well. If I want to go buy, a Maserati, they're going to say no, right? And because that's their job as the checks and balances, right? And they're the ones that spend the money as the board. They just tell us where to put it or where we want it to go. But they are, they have that responsibility, and it's a huge responsibility, and we're grateful for them being willing to sit in these seats. But it is definitely, it's a fluid situation, and that's the other piece I want to stress. This is not something that we even know, like every day. We're in touch about this, right? And I will say, as far as some of my colleagues go, I, as a superintendent, I'm not looking for a Lifetime Achievement Award. I am intimately involved in this with Mrs. Copen every single day, which, is because of what a priority this is for our district, but also how we're trying to navigate this so that the kids and the families, by and large, don't really notice that we're trying to navigate the situation. But like I said, we felt it was important to educate you as a public, right, and as a community, to just kind of level with you and say, here's where we are with it, and how it could potentially impact our district. And we're going to keep trying to get grants. We're going to keep trying to pursue alternate revenue streams, right? We're going to keep doing all of that. But at a certain point, when you're averaging, $20,000 a student for out-of-district transportation, right? So for students that choose to come to Hanover Township and that we're busing, potentially almost up to an hour away, that adds up, right? Those are real costs, So I don't want to keep going on because I know we have a whole board meeting to get to. Is there any questions from the board?
I actually just also wanted to add on to what Mr. Toomey was saying. Thank you both very much. When we talk about the potential cost savings measures, and you mentioned, about tax increases, the board, we are limited to a 2% cap. So all of these expenses have to come from what our budget currently is. So this is not, I know some people have reached out to the board and said, well, we are very, we can afford it. We have a budget that we have to stick to. There's no finding, extra money. Aside from the initiatives that we're doing, which don't quite catch up.
Or if we go, we go to a vote, right? We would have an increase higher, and we would go to the vote and ask all of you as constituents, do you vote to increase the budget beyond 2%, right?
Right.
And that's the only way we could increase it, to your point,
Right.
beyond the 2%.
But even if the voters vote it down, guess what? You still have to pay for this because this is a federal law. So
100%.
You really are stuck with the 2% tax levy. And the exceptions to the 2% tax levy are if health benefits go up an astronomical amount, the state DOE will allow you to raise taxes above 2% for really health benefits and possibly energy. But that's it. Not for McKinney Vento.
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple numbers behind that, just for context. So the district currently runs about $30 million budget annually. So that 2% increase that we're allowed to request under the law is only $600,000. And just as what you had said, the insurance for all the employees went up by that amount, by that $600,000 from last year to this year. It's about 30% increase. So just that alone, one line item consumes our whole budget increase. So everything else that's increasing at the same time, at far greater than that 2% inflation rate, are not covered. So where does all that come from? It comes from our savings. But some people may think, okay, we have a savings account. That's no big deal, except that's already planned out for long-term maintenance to take care of all the infrastructure of all the schools. So you got HVAC, roofs, paving, the buildings themselves, these things. So over time, that continually depletes until we're forced to go out and ask the townspeople to give us a referendum. So that's a large lump sum of money, basically a mortgage attached to the school that we all pay off over time, 20 years or something. And I was at a New Jersey School Board's conference last week, and I heard some pretty surprising things. I went to a training class about referendums, and very unusual stuff was said there, for me at least, because our town doesn't ask for referendums very often. Our school district has, the last time they did one was in the 2000s or 2010s to expand the elementary schools. And that's been paid off for years. So we haven't had extra budget levied on us from this district in quite a while. The township itself hasn't put a referendum on the people in 50 years. That's not the norm for New Jersey. And I asked the instructor after the class, I said, how come you're up here telling people that is the moment your referendum's paid off, you should then ask the town for another referendum? And then he said, oh, well, it's easier on them because they've already been paying the higher rate. And the moment it's paid off, it's going to stay at that higher rate. And you get a whole new mortgage on the school, a new referendum. It's no problem. They won't feel it. I'm like, but you're just taxing people more and more. Why aren't the schools able to withstand their standard functions with their budget? And he said, because that 2% cap. That was put in around, 2008 or something, or a couple of years back, and it's an artificial limit. And because of that limit, in New Jersey, it's now par for the course for school districts to just referendum over and over and over. And we're doing everything we can to not do that. So I hope that gives some background perspective on what this situation is and why it's unusually hard for our district that has been run extremely conservatively financially for as long as I've been alive. So thank you.
I just have a couple of points also. I think, first of all, are we allowed to persuade families to try to stay in district?
Yep.
And for instance, we just saw from Mr. Wasserman these phenomenal numbers, how we beat out the state. I think we should be taking a very aggressive position opposing any out-of-district placements where the school of origin do not compare with our numbers. Because if you leave this town to go to another town, it's already not a good thing in my opinion, it's already not in the best interest of the child, because now the child is in a bus, commuting, and we know what the traffic situation is in North Jersey. So they're on a bus for about an hour to an hour and a half to 2 hours a day now, already not in the best interest of the child than just staying local. And number two, if the district doesn't compare to our numbers, well, then it's not in the best interest of that child. And we should be aggressively taking that position and let them appeal, and we'll fight those fights. But I think we should be proud of our district's numbers and our performance. And unless you can show us that the district of origin is better than ours, it's not in the child's best interest. Just because he has or she has some friends there that he or she wants to stay in school with, doesn't, that can't be the full analysis. I just want people to understand this. This is a scam. The law may very well have been well-intentioned, but it's being exploited by the state. Okay, they are compelling suburbs to subsidize more urban districts, who under the Abbott funding formula are already getting more money than what we get. So on top of our tax dollars going to these other districts, we are now then cutting them a check per child when that child decides they're going to be placed here, because let's not fool ourselves about that. They're being placed in our district. Nobody's looking up in the phone book and deciding, hey, the Red Carpet Inn looks like a great place for us to go live. They're being placed there. So actors within the state are placing these people in our district, then being coached and educated on the fact that we will then have to pay to send them back to the area in which they came from, and we're stuck with the bill. It's a scam. That's what it is. There's the law was not meant to accommodate a constant mill of replacing families and children out into suburban areas from urban areas, because that's where a majority of these families are coming from. And frankly, from failed governing policies in those cities and those towns that result in higher number of homelessness. We're not talking about a family in our town who their house burns down and they're temporarily displaced, or someone loses a job and they're temporarily. Those are the isolated incidents that this law was meant to account for. That's not how it's being used. It is being used to force us to subsidize these urban areas. And something is going to have to give. And I just want to be very clear, because I know this is a big issue in the town, who the bad actor is here. It's the state, okay? It's these districts that don't tell us and scam the system, exploit it, don't tell us until the last minute, and then we're stuck having to, we're stuck holding the bag and having to figure out how to do it. So, everybody's got to keep their eye on the ball, I guess, and we should be as aggressive as possible in opposing this type of exploitation of the law. If it's something that the law was designed and meant to address, then absolutely we should be, doing what we can in order to help. And again, I'm not talking about the people who find themselves in these situations. Those people are being exploited. They don't know what's happening. They're just being educated and told, oh, you're going to go to this great town in Morris County. It's going to be great. Oh, and by the way, if your kid wants to still go to school here, they can, and they'll pay for it. I mean, who's not going to say, oh, okay, that sounds great? Of course. The law is being manipulated in such a way that is so strategic. This was not an issue 5 years ago. This was not an issue 10 years ago. All of a sudden, it's becoming, you have a business in town that has made a business model and millions of dollars off of this exploitation of this law. Okay? That is insane to me. And we can look at these laws, but it looks like the way it's drafted, again, well-intentioned, living in a hotel or motel, living in emergency and transitional shelters, living in a car, campgrounds. Yes, these were supposed to be this was supposed to address scenarios that befall people with no cause or no fault of their own, and they find themselves in this situation, and it's meant to make sure that a child is not caught in the melee where now they don't have a home, they don't have a school to go to. That's what it's meant to ensure. I mean, where it says we have to enroll immediately, that's meant to ensure there's no gap in education for the child. It's not meant to provide, like I said, a replacement mill throughout the state where predominantly citizens from predominantly urban areas where the policies there have failed, the people find themselves homeless, are then shipped out to another area of the state where they can afford it. And that's how it's being used, and I adamantly oppose our just compliance with this law. I mean, obviously we have to comply with the law, and we will. But I do think, for instance, using the best interest analysis to our benefit to ensure that we're propping up our school, we're looking at our numbers, and unless you can beat our numbers, your child is going to school here. And you want to appeal it, we'll have that fight. We have a great attorney who can help us in that regard. But I just, I wanted to make those points. It's not so much a question, it's just points that I wanted to make sure people understand that we're committed to doing what we can within the bounds of the law to oppose what I view as a scam. It's an exploitation of a very well-intentioned law. And it's really disgusting to what they're doing to these people who are having a tough time. They probably can't even wrap their head around what they're going through, and they're just being shoved in a new place where they don't know the community. They don't know. Route 10 is not a good place for a young child to be walking up and down to try to, a lot of these people come from a place where they were able to walk around the corner to a convenience store to get milk and groceries. There's no convenience store on Route 10. These kids these families aren't able to understand exactly where they now find themselves and where they're going to have to get around. They don't understand where the buses pick up and I don't even know where the buses and everything are and stuff. This is a driving town. People drive. So, and I guarantee a lot of these people, if they're homeless, they probably don't drive, a lot of them. And these are all the things, these people are being harmed and they're being used in a way, again, to compel districts who already are disadvantaged by the Abbott decision to actually subsidize those districts in addition to what they're already getting from the state. It's disgusting.
Also, my question is, for the teachers, how much time or when are they told they're getting a new child into the classroom? You said sometimes it just happens.
No, it doesn't just happen. We actually make sure that the school is notified and that they actually have an adequate, usually we try to do like a 2 full day turnaround just because we don't want to surprise a teacher, right? Because you also want the child to feel welcome that they're coming in and have a desk and a name tag on there. And it's also not fair to the school or the teacher. So generally speaking, I mean, it's if we find out at 3 o'clock, that day is over. So essentially you're looking at probably the third day, right, at that point. But yeah, no, there's definitely, they say immediately, and that's my interpretation of immediately is we still have to make sure that we're, we still have a school to run. So we can't just say, time out, everyone. We got to get this going, right? So we do the best we can, but it's very fluid, and we are making sure to put that, the conversation with the principal, as well as so that the principal can look at it and see, well, what section is that child going into, so those conversations are happening.
Okay, perfect.
I also want to just add that generally, if we're looking at transportation costs, it takes 5 to 10 days to set those contracts up. So we are doing the background check to make sure when they identify that they are displaced in the town, are they really within the confines of the town? Because sometimes they think that they're going to Hanover Township and it's not Hanover. So that's part of the early strategies to figure out where are they located, why is it a temporary displacement, and how can we get them additional supports. So we have been able to get things like bus tickets. We have been able to get things like hygiene kits to send to families in order to support that transition into school. We don't want them to start the school day without being the only child in the classroom who doesn't have a Chromebook. Right? Everyone has to access education, and whether that means through technology or through transportation, that's what this team works really diligently to do. I do want to clarify for you, I've gotten to know a lot of these families very intimately. A lot of them are offered a voucher system. The hotels in town are not a shelter, and so I just want to kind of put out that understanding. If they were a shelter, they would be regulated at a different level by the state. Additionally, we would be able to submit for some reimbursement, which we are not. They are not a shelter. The shelters in the surrounding counties are full. I know firsthand, Warren County, Sussex County, they are sending to Morris County. This is not just a Hanover thing, this is a statewide epidemic that is happening. But they are offered a voucher, and I will contest many of them look at the vouchers and say, do I want to go to Camden or do I want to go to Hanover? I've never heard of Hanover, but I've heard of Camden.
Yeah, I have some things to say.
Okay.
So, first of all, you also didn't touch on the fact that once a student is here, their siblings are then attached to that student. They can go to I remember having that discussion. Right. So, whatever district that their parents choose that child to go, they don't want to separate their children. We could wind up having multiple students in one family paying for that. I also think that, I think that we can agree that other extreme measures beyond our potential cost-saving measures here we discussed may be needed if this issue continues on this trajectory. It is not, this is round one, people. Round one. I don't think it's sunk in to our township. We are not here saying we don't want these children taught. We don't have compassion for these families and these children. This was never uttered by anyone on this board, anyone in any of these classrooms. However, we have a responsibility to all the children. And as you can hear, there's so much time and effort and everything else pulled from our administration and our teachers that it is affecting every single child in this district. We want these children taught as well and as properly and in the safest environment that we can give them. It is unsustainable, and that is the issue here. Thank you.
I just wanted to confirm that I checked with the Director of Planning and I asked, are there any homeless shelters in Hanover Township? And the answer is no. So somewhere along the line, a breakdown occurred where actions taken by people outside this room turned 2 hotels in our town into homeless shelters, and we're now here as a result. Thanks.
To clarify, they're not shelters, they're homeless placement locations. Otherwise, like they said, we could get some funding out of that, just to clarify.
Right, without the appropriate funding to back it, or really the appropriate conditions for children to be living in, and I have police reports to back that up. Some of the most horrendous things I've ever read on paper came from a certain location.
And the other piece, just to add to, if a student is enrolled in our school by October 15th, we do put them on the ASSA, which is for the state aid form. So, there is, if any child was here by October 15th, they will be part of that. And that's standard, separate from, the homeless reimbursement or anything like that. But, you're getting, we're not getting reimbursed for all of the ancillary things that we're talking about. And I know there's members of the public that have comment, but I know it's the board president's meeting, and so I'll leave that to you.
Thank you. I did want to invite up Mayor Gallagher. If you'd like to say a couple words, please. Thank you, of course.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Mr. McCabe, you can tell he used to play and sing, right? Hey, testing 1, 2. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for your partnership to try to find a good solution to this series of problems. The last time I saw a mayor come in here and try to work side by side with the Board of Education is when I was on the Board of Education. It was during some very serious budget cuts under the Christie administration. And the words were simply that. They were words. They were patronizing us, making us feel like we had a friend in town hall, and it was a bunch of nothing. We've all learned since I got brought into this in the spring that our words do mean something, our actions do mean something, and our goal is abundantly clear, and our goal is to do the best we can for everyone, especially the families that need the help the most. But at what cost? So I would just like to tell you one philosophical thing. When I was getting married, I talked to my good friend's father, and he said to me, I'm going to give you advice that you will have a beautiful marriage forever if you listen to me. And it took me till like 30 to start to really listen to anybody. So I said, please, let me hear your great advice. He says, there's two kinds of people. During a problem or a crisis, there's the person that wants to figure out whose fault it is. And if your wife is that person, just take the blame for it, and everything's going to be good by the next day. But there's the person that identifies an issue and wants to solve it. And I'm honored to say that when we began looking at this together, I talked to some people in my loop, and you know what I was told? That's the state's problem. That's Murphy's problem. Well, how does that help us? How does that help Hanover Township? How does it help our kids? And how does that help us address these budget issues? Because I know from being on that side of the desk and on my side of the desk with the governing body, these budgets are really tough. They're really tough, and we're limited. So I would like to say one more thing before I jump into a little bit, and I'm very limited on what I can say tonight, but I will say probably a little more than I shared with my governing body, because we're in this fight together, and things are starting to move in a beautiful direction. And I mean that, and my words mean something. When I was running for the Board of Ed the second time, a reporter from the Eagle said to me, what's the most important skill that a Board of Ed member should have? And I thought, and I said, listening. I said, you have to have listening skills. And Henry Kissinger was very big on talking about the importance of listening. So when you listen and you really try to understand, and you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, you could start to create solutions to problems and call in your resources. And if you have the credibility and you have the integrity, people are going to return your phone call and work with you and help you. So we had one meeting, and you guys know who it was with. It was about 10, 12 people, not the highest level, but people that said they can help us. And it was a false start. It was a nothing meeting. 30 days later, I followed up and said, where are we? Oh, well, let me get back to you. So I called Senator Panaccio, who's our senator now. I told him about everything we were going through and all the problems that we had. And I said, I'm an optimistic guy. I can always find an angle. I'm not finding an angle here. And I told you that too, Lisa. I don't see an angle. Senator Panaccio set us up with a meeting down in Trenton. We went down to Trenton. It was me. Where's Fred? Fred, Chief Locke, and Senator Panaccio. I thought I was going to fill in some blanks. There was 14 people in Governor Murphy's conference room and 7 or 8 on Teams. He introduced me and said, take the floor. I was like, man, I can talk, but I can't carry a meeting like this, but I did. And what I said was, I said, I know how this works politically. I know you're looking at us as the haves against the have-nots, and it's very easy to think that we're affluent, and our county has an attitude problem and just doesn't want certain people to interact. And I said, it couldn't be further from the truth. I said, I come from Hudson County. I said, a lot of people chose the suburbs. I know a lot of people won't leave Hudson County. A lot of times it's a choice, and you nailed quite a few things, Greg. You want to walk to the store, you want to walk to church, you have your best friend that lives 2 houses down. My relatives, some of them still don't have driver's licenses because you don't need it. But here's what I began with the state. I said, this is a well-intentioned program, and you said that too. And I said, but I'm going to tell you why this well-intentioned program is failing. And the people that it's failing are the very people that you're trying to help. I started with the children. I said, I'm going to advocate for the children today. I said, everyone that I know that has children, a child or children, will give everything they have, including their lives, to make sure that kid has everything. And my children went here. And I still have pictures from when Katie decorated her locker prior to coming here in 6th grade. I said, how do these kids have a fighting chance? How do they have a fighting chance? I said, look at the environment they're living in. Look at the crime. Look at the conditions. Look at the lack of sleep, the lack of good nutrition, sometimes not having a loving parent or guardian. The police, the first responders, and I'm not going to go too into the conditions because we all know what the conditions are. Now picture that kid coming to school with 2 hours of sleep. They can't fit in. I said, this is no environment for our children, period. And I said, and we're going to back it up with hard data today. And we had quite a bit from our police department. Our police records are public record. We went into quite a bit about the amount of calls we have and the type of problems there are in this facility. After we went through quite a bit, the Assistant Attorney General came up to me after the meeting and he said, Mayor, would it make you feel better if we pulled the children out of there? Now immediately I thought about your budget. First of all, the safety of the kids. Second of all, the budget for the schools. And I said, to be honest with you, that would be a start. It would be a start, but it's a problem, and it's a state problem, because you're taking a piece of property and turning it into a multi-million-dollar business model from a failed state program. From there, we began a relationship with the DCA. I got a call 2 days later, and they said, Gallagher, we have vouchers, we have an idea. It's as fast as you want to make it happen. I said, I'll meet you tonight. We've been working with the DCA now for 74 days, 7 days a week. We had meetings, and now Hanover Township is officially a satellite office. I have numbers of the amount of people that they're currently placing, and they're in process now. Every Friday for the next 4 weeks, they're going to be using our office as a satellite office, including Hope One from Sheriff Gannon, because we're trying to provide services. What I said was, I think that's great, and I think it's kind of cute, but if we empty out and create available rooms, what's going to stop other counties from looking at that as an opportunity? Then I was told, well, Morris County's not placing anymore. I said, well, that doesn't mean anything to me because other counties can place in those available rooms. So we're looking at that piece, and that's, again, legal with Fred. We're looking at that piece as a major piece. From that, we had a meeting. The residents of the facility wanted to have a meeting with me, and they wanted no police present. 80 people that live in the motel came and had a meeting on a Friday night with me and 4 members of the state. At the end of the meeting, they wanted to break the room up into 2 pieces. They said, we're going to take all your information and we're going to start to talk to you about vouchers and placing you out of this facility that is not created to house people long-term. And we talk about long-term too. What is long-term? Is it a kitchenette? We went through all of that quite a bit. Make a long story short, they're making quite a bit of progress with these placements, but I'm still not comfortable that we could put in a mechanism to stop them from replacing. So we're looking at the business model that the businesses like this put out there to accept, almost like the bid process in business, to accept more and more people, because it turned into a beautiful business you can make a lot of money on it, but on the backs of the people that need it the most. But I want you to know that the people have come up to me in the meeting, and when I went to visit the DCA, and I talked to them almost 7 days a week. I have a meeting tomorrow with one of Governor Murphy's chief of staff in Town Hall at 4:30. We're looking at the progress. We're looking at what we could do. I told them that I'm speaking to you guys tonight, but I also had a meeting with the Department of Education. I'm not bragging, and some of this isn't good for me because I'm not one of those guys, and we live with them all the time to talk about I don't do that. But we had a meeting with the Department of Education, and it was my meeting. We had 9 people on a Teams meeting. And I said, let's just look at the funding. Let's look at reimbursement. Let's look at federal. Let's look at state. And the one guy on the meeting with me wasn't well-versed in it. And he referred to a grant. And I told you this, Mark. I said, I don't want to look at a grant. I want to look at subsidies. I want to look at offsetting costs. And there's all different mechanisms, and I'm talking about this because I'm the guy that got a $3.2 million grant for the rivers. So education and students and their well-being is a lot more important than cleaning out a river. So I want you to know on the municipal level, I hear you loud and clear. We hear you loud and clear. We have about 5 or 6 pieces that are pushing and pushing and pushing. And you read about one of them last week, and I can't really speak on that today. But I want you to know that I hear you. You know I can be pretty aggressive. My name is Thomas. I was christened Thomas. I am Doubting Thomas. I don't believe anybody until I see it, and that's real. And I want you to know that I'm available 20 hours a day. The chief has my wife's cell phone from 12 to 4. Her phone's on, but mine's charging in the kitchen. But I don't really want to do a Q&A because I'm very, very careful. If any of you guys have 1 or 2 questions that maybe I can paint on the corners with, I'd be happy to do it. And Fred, if you'd like to fill in any blanks I might have missed, but does anybody have anything that I can try to address to you real quick?
We've been sued, so I'm not going to ask you any questions.
Yeah, and Mayor, I mean, the board, we've discussed things in closed session. We understand the legal parameters that you guys are contained in. You're in litigation right now. We appreciate what you're doing. I think the only way that this problem is going to be solved is holistically with, the board providing you the data of the kids coming in, working with the state, and hopefully the state legislatures come up with something. Because I think the one thing, if you looked at the 2 costs, you had the one that's $570,000 for the kids that are coming here. The ones that are being shipped out, that's almost $800,000. So a real simple solution for the DOE would be, if a child is placed here in a temporary residence, they should go to school here and not be put on a bus, because the problem with the busing is you can't even find busing. So, that could cut down those costs tremendously. And really, the only kids that should be bused are kids that this district cannot educate because of their specialized disabilities. And then those limited kids would go to be bused to an out-of-district placement where they'd get the education that they need. But I think what board member Greg said earlier is it's a mill, and it's not just happening in Hanover. It's happening in any town that has hotels or motels. Literally, Route 23, Route 46, Route 10. You look at those hotels; they're not being used for business folks. They're being used as these temporary shelters where the state is placing them.
And that's the one point I made, and I make over and over. If this was private sector, this would not be a $15 million business, period. But I want to say 2 more things before I ask Fred. And then, Fred, I didn't talk myself into a corner yet, did I? Okay, not yet. Did you hear that, guys? I just want to say, too, when I was on the Board of Ed for the first 2-3 years when I was on the governing body, they teased me that I thought I was still on the Board of Ed because I differentiate these financial problems differently than some people. I look at it as all of our money. It's Hanover Township money. And even when I got on the Board of Ed, I said it cost $85 million to live in Hanover Township. And I heard from so many people on the governing body, well, that's the Board of Ed budget. That's the Board of Ed budget. And I'd say, but it's our money. So I want you to know that I don't see myself as having any daylight between anybody on this governing body. And I don't see any daylight between me and any of the residents. And I will not walk away from a fight, but I like to get all my information. I like to listen, and I like to be smart, and I like to have strategy. So we have to communicate, and I will not walk away from a fight, and I think you guys are going to be pretty happy with some of the developments that have just taken place in the last couple days. And I'm available 20 hours a day, and some of you guys, I'm available 24. You can call my wife's cell phone. If there's no other questions, I'm going to ask Fred to speak for a minute or two if he could.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming and thank you for speaking, and we do appreciate all the hard work that you've been doing. So thank you.
And you know what, Lisa, you're the president, but I'm going to put this out for you to make the decision. If anybody would like to meet me on a Friday afternoon at Town Hall and just sit in for an hour and see what the process actually is and see what we can learn and take away from it. Because like Mark, even Mark said, this is going to go around. You said this is going to go around. This is a problem that we have to solve together and come up with a solution. And I want you to know that nobody's doing what we're doing. I was advised, and I spoke to him this morning for half an hour, DCA, one of the directors of housing, about different pieces of what we actually can do. And he also said to me, are you updating the gubernatorial candidates, both of them? And I said, that's my job too, because we're the only ones trying to fix this rather than point at one another. And I said, I am. And there are models, and there's very different opinions on how this can be solved. But we have a lot of work to do, and I'm ready to do it, and I know you guys are. So I'm just going to say thank you very much for everything you guys are doing, and you know I'm available all the time. Thanks, guys.
Mayor, just make sure if there's something you want me to touch upon, but I'll just want to fill in some of the things that the mayor had to say, but please interrupt me if I'm going. First, good evening, everybody. I want to say thank you for having us tonight. What I do want to tell you as township attorney that, back in March of this year, the mayor and the administration indicated to us, thanks to you, that this has to be a priority, the issue what was spoke about this evening. And so the governing body concerned about what was going on in hotels and the health and safety and welfare updated its hotel registration and licensing ordinance that had been outdated for probably 50 years, okay? Which isn't uncommon. We've seen that across the state. But what was different was the insistence to make sure there was compliance, that all of the hotels registered and complied. So with that being said, and in response to that, from an enforcement standpoint, we're in federal district court with one of the hotels. And again, we are limited, but I think it's important that you are made aware. There's myself and there's two other attorneys that are representing the township. And the first thing that was done is when the ordinance was being enforced, one of the owners of the hotel and their attorney filed this in New Jersey Superior Court. We immediately decided we wanted this decided in federal district court. So we moved it to federal district court, and that was opposed by, and I'll just say, the hotels for now. That was opposed. That was a battle. We thought that was the place where we wanted it to be. We couldn't resolve that. And about 10 days ago, the judge issued an opinion that the matter will stay in federal district court, which is important to us. Now, from there, the other issue that has come to light is we have also taken on not only the hotel licensing aspect, but we've now looked even closer at the zoning aspect of this as well. It's because it's a priority, it's a health and safety concern. We've gone back through the history of all the properties. This goes for all hotels, so that I'm clear on the record. And with that in mind, notices of violations have been issued, and it has now prompted yet another aspect of what will likely be more litigation. But it also has prompted some discussions that may lead to, and this is what I can say, a cease and desist from any new placements at these hotels, effective immediately. And that's something we're on the cusp of. You can't hold me to it, but I wouldn't get up here and say it unless the mayor had said that that was all right to generally discuss. Why is that important? Because if the mayor is making all the inroads to try to stop to try to help the placement, and we think there's a good chance, and you can never bank on government to be certain, but I feel like, and I'll just look to the mayor, that between now and the end of the year, there's a good chance that those who are placed right now, those families, will have an opportunity to place in a permanent type of residence. That's what the DCA meetings are about. That's what the mayor's been, making sure that we get the priority to do that. So if that happens, and let's just say in the perfect world, everyone's placed, that's good for the families, that's good for the township. The concern has been, okay, we haven't seen any town, by the way, enforce the ordinance for hotels and have people vacate. Okay, we've had some temporary health and safety thing. We haven't seen that. We get a lot of questions. Why isn't it enforced? I understand, but it's like anything else. We get questions, why are the kids permitted in school? We say, we have laws we have to follow, all right? So right now, with the placement, what we're concerned about is that it'll be backfilled. And we think we have an opportunity to get a cease and desist on the backfill. So that would put us in a much better place than when we started in March. And you definitely, told us how important this is. And so that's where we are on those fronts. Limited to say more than that. Do I think it's going to happen soon? I do. I really do, as far as the possibility of trying to enter into what would be a consent order to stop the placements. That would be a good thing. But until this happens, and I would give it over the next 10 or 15 days for that to occur, I can't say it's final, and I have to be careful, but I know it's so important as to where you are in this process. And then, as the mayor said, you saw the other action that the governing body took last week, because candidly, this is a property that does fit perhaps a very ideal situation for limited affordable housing. It's not a property that really can be developed to a great extent. It has a lot of wetlands and floodplain limitations. So ultimately, if it were acquired for affordable housing, and that is the goal of the Township Committee, that's what's in the ordinance, it would be limited to what is already there as 108 type of units. So it would be a subset of that if it had to be sort of retrofitted for, say, for an example, senior housing. It would be something less than that. So just to give you an idea, the ordinance is written for the specific purpose of affordable housing because, like other pressures, the township being desirable, we have 5 interveners for affordable housing. That's probably near the top in Morris County. Some towns have 2, 1, some have none. But we have 5. And that's because, one, the township was very aggressive in its planning and did not just turn around and say we're going to over-plan for this obligation because it's high-density development, and at the same time because of its desirability. So the property fits for what the township is looking for, to go in and acquire the property either by negotiation or condemnation and have it be a property for what would be, for lack of a better word, real affordable housing and appropriate affordable housing. So that's where we are in the process. We had some good things that happened, in my opinion, from a legal standpoint, and I'll just sort of just break it down. In August of this year, Judge Minkowitz, he's the assignment judge in Morris County, ruled that the town of Sparta can enact and enforce an ordinance that restricts residents from having the B&B, the weekend rentals, so for less than 30 days. They prohibited that. So if you look at that opinion and you say, well, if the judge can uphold that ordinance, there's a lot of the same principles when we talk about something much less than residential long-term housing. And we think that's something that's an important decision. For many years, and even now, the DCA oversees the hotels. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to work around that aspect of the DCA. It's not the DCA part that the mayor's been talking about, and take the control in our own hands for the health and safety and for the fact of what it be is enforcement. And that's what we're trying to do at this point in time. But that's a very helpful decision because that's right here in our district, that case. Mayor, is there anything?
You know what, Fred, if it's okay, I would just like to say one thing.
Yeah.
Especially to our team over here that's working with the enrollment and the families and the stress. I'm not going to get into numbers because my biggest thing is if we talk about the amount of people leaving, the backfill aspect. which we're working on very, very hard. But last week, 9 people were placed, and I have the breakdown on the ages. It's a very good process that's real. So I want you to know that we are working on this, and I talked to the DCA and the Department of Education about the $1.3 million. And I said, I'm involved in budgets. I've been involved in 14 of them so far between the Board of Ed and the municipality. I said 1.3 this year is 1.8 next year or 1.9. Then it's 2.4. Then it's 2.7. I said, how does that work? What business model is that acceptable in? So I want you to know that anything I've learned from you guys and anything that I can do, we're Hanover Township. I do not differentiate between our segments of leadership. So Fred, Fred's doing an incredible job. Fred, why don't you close this out? I just want to say thank you, guys. I'm going to hang out for a little bit and listen, if that's okay.
So that's where we are. Matt, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what we're trying to work out as far as a consent order to make sure that at the end of the day, there's no unintended consequences for us, because I think there's an opportunity for us, as the mayor talked about the backfilling. We want to make sure we can capture that if we have these placements and we're supporting, and the mayor's got the attention of the state agencies. And I'm not here to, throw out accolades, except I have to say, you really tasked the mayor to try to solve this. And I have had calls, I am serious, 7 days a week, mornings, noon, and night, and many of you have too, because he will not stop until this matter is resolved. And a lot of times, you knock on the state door and that's about all you can do, and you say, look, I really tried. He will not stop until everyone's placed safely and that this issue is in a much better place. And I can just assure you, and I think by the things I'm telling you also, I'm letting you know that the Township Committee has been very supportive about whatever it takes to get to this point. And we know we're not done, but we're very far along in the process. I think it was interesting what Mr. Skiff said tonight, and Justin, that this is really an unfunded mandate. And I think it's something that, Matt, we should discuss, maybe working together on to the Mandates Council, because the Mandates Council is a very unique aspect of the Constitution that says, you come down, I've been down there, you come down, you make a case. If it's an unfunded mandate, it'll be stricken, and there is no appeal. If you lose, you're bound by it, but you're already stuck. We all are stuck, not you, we all are. And I mean, it's something to think about. But in the meantime, we'll continue to keep you posted, and I really hope that the mayor has given you, and the Township Committee has given you a response to the support that you very much said you needed.
Thank you so much, Mr. Semra.